Welcome to episode 26 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. Can you believe it? Today's episode marks the halfway point on a year's worth of episodes. Now, it has been a blast hosting Anchored in Education, and I look forward to many more episodes. One thing I will promise right now is that I will continue to try audience interaction through podcasts, sort of like today. I'd like to take a quick trip, and I want to take all of you with me. I want you to close your eyes as we travel all the way back to April 15th, 1912. We're going to board a vessel destined to cross the Atlantic Ocean. With your eyes closed, try to picture the layout of the ship, the Titanic, the best you can. This beautiful ship was just recently built and is furnished like none other. The white walls so recently painted that a faint smell of fresh paint lingers as rich mahogany chairs and tables beautify the dining salon. Wicker chairs and tables set upon brightly colored linoleum floor next to a view of the vast Atlantic Ocean. And there's a reason in 1912 why they said it was the grandest ship of all time, a floating palace, if you will, with leather-upholstered loungers designed with elegance and for comfort surrounded by intricate stained glass windows. And it would be difficult to mention the Titanic without mentioning the grand staircase. Made from both oak and wrought iron, it made passengers feel like royalty as they descended to the first-class dining room. Now, with your eyes still closed, rearrange the layout in whatever manner you choose. Move chairs. Move the grand staircase if you choose. The freedom is yours to rearrange the Titanic. Now, I'm going to do a very simple and quick check of your new arrangement by asking just one yes or no question. Would the Titanic still sink? Of course it would. Regardless of any layout configuration, the sinking of the Titanic was not caused by the location of rooms or the furniture selected to adorn the massive ocean liner. What could have kept it afloat would have been a stronger hull or a leader more receptive to potential danger warnings. While this may seem a silly exercise of a few minutes you'll never get back, it's really more similar to what we do in K-12 education than many of us would like to admit. We oftentimes arrange the furniture when the foundations are cracking in our classroom management. Too often, a toxic work atmosphere is reorganized in an attempt to reduce or eliminate the toxicity in our educational organizations as well. All that has really been done, though, is rearrange the same factors that made up the negative atmosphere before, thereby spreading the stink without really sanitizing anything. In order to improve K-12 and the problems that arise to create better classrooms and schools, we might consider our need to restructure rather than rearrange. Now, before we continue, let's take a moment to define restructure. According to Merriam-Webster, restructured is defined as to change the basic organization or structure of. The key word upon which to focus is change. Thinking back to the Titanic, can we see how change could have altered the course of history? If we were to have rearranged what was already there, we would have no lasting effect upon the disaster. Now, let us try a familiar K-12 workplace scenario. It probably isn't too far from the truth to say that we have all experienced a toxic person, which, for our purposes here today, would be a teacher, Ned Nasty, that is, one who has a negative demeanor in speech, actions, or in one's general existence in the workplace. Taking this one step further, let's assume for our example here that others have already sidebarred with leadership about this person's bringing down the atmosphere of the lounge during lunchtime. Let's go ahead and examine a few choices. First, a leader could simply rearrange the person's schedule so they have a lunch at a different time than those complaining. Let's think about that. Unfortunately, this would result in Ned having lunch with another group of people that will soon share with leadership the same complaint. Second, a leader could invite change to the way the person is behaving and the structure of the interactions taking place. What might be a good first step? Quite possibly, it could be just a heart-to-heart conversation, an open talk, as it were. Could it be possible that Ned doesn't see what he is doing as toxic? Maybe so, and then again, maybe not. When we consult Tabby Kaler's book, The Process Therapy Model, we see that more than likely a psychological need is not being met in Ned, and in the absence of the positive fulfillment of that need, Ned is unconsciously meeting those needs through distressed behaviors such as being critical, hyperconvictional, manipulative, or even reactive. It's not so much whether or not these behaviors are intentional. Of course they are. It's more important to understand that the person exhibiting the behaviors is interpreting their resultant effect differently than those who may be affected by them. Rearranging would be for a leader to invite the person to consider that a more appropriate time and place would be appropriate for the behavior. Restructuring, though, would be for the leader to help the person address the underlying unmet need so that the person moves out of distress. Tragically, when a problem arises in K-12 education, the solution educators often use involves rearranging previous pieces to create different variations of the same problem. Quite possibly, this rearranging is done to prevent feelings from being hurt through a bit of avoidance, as restructuring takes much more time and attention and often a crucial and critical conversation. In extreme cases, it might result in a bit of severance. In the book First Break All the Rules, Marcus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman stated, sometimes the only way to cure a bad relationship is to get out of it. Blunt? Yes. But ask yourself this. If Ned Nasty is constantly bringing you down when he is around, is it not possible to extricate yourself from that particular environment? To be a successful educator, you may find yourself at times making these types of decisions, those that affect you emotionally. But a truly successful educator is going to act in the best interest of those dedicated to furthering the organization's mission rather than in the best interest of least resistance or expediency. We can also think of a familiar classroom scenario as well. In my opinion, classroom management is the crux of teaching. Effective teaching and meaningful learning cannot happen without it. Yet, what happens when Tommy Talker is disrupting a lesson again? How often is the problem addressed simply by moving Tommy to another seat? Now, I've had Tommy Talkers in class before. Newsflash, he will talk in the front, the middle, or the back of the class. And yes, he will even talk in the seat that is around no other student. Or what about those elementary classrooms where they have to move a light or a clip? Sure, you may have assigned a consequence to go with the associated color Tommy is now on, but what happens the next day? Tommy's talking again. The behavior was never addressed. We've essentially rearranged the problem to occur in a similar manner without addressing the behavior. There was no restructuring. It would be like adding more oars to the Titanic, but no more lifeboats. So before I go, I want to pause briefly to give a shout out to Dr. Ryan Donlin, Associate Professor at Indiana State University. Ryan was a professor I worked close with during my time at ISU. He challenged my thinking and deserves a lot of credit for making me a better educator, leader, and writer. Now, a significant portion of this episode was originally a blog post that Ryan and I wrote together back in January 2015 on his ISU Ed Leader Shop blog, and I wouldn't want this episode to get by without giving credit where credit is due. And I've mentioned some pretty awesome books today, so head over to escottengland.com and click the Read More link from today's episode to check out those book titles and a link to them as well. So let's go back to the Titanic again as we ponder acting in our best interest compared with acting for the greater good. The Titanic carried the required minimum 16 lifeboats plus an additional 4 inflatable lifeboats. All of this for a total of 2,222 passengers and crew members. By now, we all know there was room for more lifeboats, but the decision was made to settle for the minimum. It was, after all, unsinkable. It wouldn't matter how the lifeboats were arranged, the number was still 20 in all. That is thinking for oneself. Now, let's imagine that someone had acted upon change before the Titanic set sail. Imagine that additional lifeboats were added to accommodate everyone that would sail on this maiden voyage. Adding the additional lifeboats, even the proper amount, if you will, would not have prevented the iceberg from being in the path of the luxury ocean liner. But when the ship still struck the iceberg in the middle of the cold, dark Atlantic, more lives could have been saved than lost. We cannot stand idly by and watch K-12 morale sink as tragically as the Titanic. We must summon the courage from our educator toolbox to begin the difficult process of restructuring. With hope and prudent stewardship, we can plug the hole and save everyone aboard. Because at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.